سخنران این قسمت از پنل خانم شورا مکارمی هستند. شورا مکارمی مردم شناس و پژوهشگر در مرکز ملی پژوهش‌های پاریس می باشند. او دکترای خود را در رشته مردم شناسی در مونترال با موضوع کنترل مهاجرت و بازداشت پناهجویان در اروپا به پایان رسانده است. وی در خصوص قوم‌نگاری کار میدانی انجام داده و از سال 2010 روی موضوع خشونت‌های دولتی در ایران کار می‌کند. در سال 2011 دفتر یادداشت‌های عزیز در قلب انقلاب ایران که بر اساس خاطرات پدر بزرگش میباشد به چاپ رسانده. شورا همچنین پژوهشگر مهمان در دانشگاه‌های کلمبیا، مکگیل و پرینستون میباشد. موضوع سخنرانی شورا مادری در زندان هست. من اینجا یک چیز رو هم اضافه میکنم به اینکه شورا، مادر شورا در زندان‌های جمهوری اسلامی اعدام شد. بفرمایید.
I will go on without transition from the previous presentation to this one. I would like to start this presentation by the extract of a letter written in 2011 by a political prisoner, Nasrin Sotoudeh, to her daughter. To my dearest Mehrave, my daughter, my pride and joy. I greet you from Evans Ward 209 and hope that you're doing well. It has been 6 months since I was taken away from you, my beloved children. Throughout these 6 months, we were only allowed to see each other a few times, and even then in the presence of security agents. During this time, I was never allowed to write to you, to receive a picture, or even meet with you freely without any security restrictions. My dear Mehrave, you more than anyone understand the sorrow in my heart and the conditions under which we were allowed to meet. Each time, after each visit and every single day, I struggle with the notion of whether or not I have taken into consideration and respected my own children's rights. More than anything, I needed to be sure that you, my beloved daughter, whose wisdom I very much believe in, did not accuse me of violating my own children's rights. My dearest Mehrave, I began reflecting upon your rights and that of your brother from the very first day I was arrested. It wasn't long, however, before all my doubts and concerns were put to rest, and I knew that I, better say we, were able to stand firm and true to our convictions. Your strength and endurance was no less than mine. I once told you, my daughter, I hope you never think that I was not thinking of you, or that it was my actions that deserved such punishment. It was then that you lovingly caressed my face with your small hands and replied, I know, Mommy, I know. It was on that day, because of the confident manner in which you spoke, that I was freed of the nightmare of being judged by my own daughter. I miss you, my dearest, and send you 100 kisses. Maman Nasrin. The same prisoner who has been released last September after 3 years in jail started a hunger strike in October 2012 to protest against the punishment imposed on the families of women political prisoners, stating that, I'm quoting Nasrin Sotoudeh's statement, of the 36 women who are serving sentences in the political prisoners' ward, the first-degree relatives of 13 of them are either in prison or are being prosecuted. This number comprises more than 1/3 of female political prisoners. There are also those who have more than one member of their family in prison or under prosecution. Through her prison experience and statements, Nasrin Sotoudeh shed the light on a reality that has been a main dimension of repression against women political prisoners in Iran since the establishment of the Islamic Republic. This reality is the way the social and emotional relations of the women prisoners, as mothers, have been used as a tool to intimidate, break, or punish them. At a broader level, this practice shows two important aspects of political repression and state violence in Iran. The first one is how the imprisonment of opponents and the prison regime serve a wider function of social control and silencing, because it does not only target individuals but whole families and social networks. Just as circles becoming wider and wider, the imprisonment, torture, and execution of one individual have direct and indirect impacts on the whole community, be they social isolation, economic impoverishment, psychological trauma, and so on. So when we assess and measure repression, we need to diversify our tools in order to understand these large-scale impacts. The second aspect of political repression, highlighted by the treatment of motherhood in prison, is how state violence is designed to govern a population through interfering in the most intimate sphere of affections and emotions. In this context, it seems that violence against women have taken at least 3 different forms in prison in the 3 last decades in Iran. The first one is sexual torture and rape, physical and verbal violence with a sexual dimension, as it has been documented thoroughly in a report released by Justice for Iran in 2012. The second dimension is gender domination. I can quote as example the case of Mojahed prisoners in the 1980s being used as maids in prison guards' private houses. So in these cases, it is not the gender violence, violence against women, is not a sexual violence. It does not target their sexual life as such, but it uses their place and gender function as women to implement violence on a gender domination situation. And the third kind of gender violence, violence against women, are the cases of prisoners targeted as mothers. From an anthropological perspective, it is important to notice that these different kinds of violence against women also classify them or subcategorize them according to their social functions or statuses. Rape was used against virgin women before they were executed in the 1980s. The raping of these political prisoners and these rape were justified by the fact that a virgin being believed to be sent in paradise, the women who were believed as being virgin needed to not be it anymore in order not to be sent to paradise. So the raping of these political prisoners reaffirmed their status as young women, virgin women, having a certain place in their social worlds and families. And witness statements refer to the fact that their fathers were visited by the prison guards having married them before their executions. On the other side, the prisoners who had children or gave birth to children in prison underwent constant pressures, playing with feelings of guilt, shame, and fear for their children. These different kinds of violence all share in common the fact that they deny women prisoners the status of political individuals and redefine them as specific kinds of women, such as virgins or mothers. Here, beyond the silencing of opposition groups, repression also organizes a social control. Indeed, violence and punishment draws a cartography of the places where women should not go and the activities that are not for them. Among the 3 dimensions of violence experienced by women in prison, I have, as Rezvand mentioned, a first-hand knowledge of the third one, that is motherhood and mother-children relations, through my experience as the daughter of a political prisoner. As many children in prison of prisoners in the 1980s, I have a complex relationship to this past because, on the one hand, I have very few memories of these years, which were years of terror, violence, and repression. But on the other hand, I know that what happened back then has shaped my trajectory. And I am aware that understanding the mechanisms of violence as we, prisoners and family, live them in the everyday is crucial to understanding the way social control and state power function since the institution of the Islamic Republic. Although my mother is no longer here to testify, and although I was too young to remember accurately, I'm lucky enough to have an access to what happened during these years through a testimony written by my grandfather, recounting the arrest, imprisonment, and death of two of his daughters who were candidates for the legislative elections for the Mujahideen Khalq organization. My aunt, Fatoneh Zarei, was arrested in 1982 and executed in October 82. She was pregnant at the time of her arrest and was still pregnant a few days before her execution. My mother, Fatemeh Zarei, was arrested on the 15th of June 81, sentenced to 10 years of prison, and executed in the summer of 88, a few months before the announced date of her release during the massacre of 88, who counted thousands of victims. The memoirs of my grandfather have been published in French and in English, and the Persian print of the book is in process. This testimony is precious because it documents the everyday experience of prison for the prisoner's family. It shows precisely how the motherhood of women political prisoners has become a sphere of punishment, pressure, and even torture for prisoners and their families. An extract that I will read now may give you a better idea of this mechanism. In this text, my grandfather recalls the home visit granted to my mother in spring 88, a few months before her death. It is not the most spectacular part of my mother's prison experience, which involved many episodes of torture. Yet it is an important piece because it shows how psychological torture works, and it also sheds a different light on the practices of home visits that are still very much used by prison administration today. Home visits granted to political prisoners, for instance, were publicized in the reformist press and social networks and gave rhythm to state repression after 2009. But as my grandfather's testimony shows, these home visits are not only a right granted to the prisoner by the prison administration, but they are also fully part of the mechanism through which the state controls, intimidates, and governs population at a large scale through the imprisonment of a few individuals. So my grandfather writes, in March 88, against a deposit of 1 million tomans, they authorized a 3-day home visit for the prisoners belonging to left-wing subgroups. On her 3rd day at home, Fatemeh's husband called from France so that she could speak to her children. We had in fact informed him she may be allowed out and given him the possible dates of the visit. But however much we insisted she speak to her children, she refused, saying, "I haven't asked the brothers' permission for that. I don't dare to do anything without permission. Your children at the other end of the line are begging to speak to you. They want to hear their mother's voice." She replies, "You're not present to see how they torture me. I am the one who has to suffer their savagery." We remembered this day as one of frustration for us and for the members of our family who were gathered at our house. Finally, her husband and children hung up, disheartened. When her in-laws reproached Fatemeh for her attitude, she replied, "You have no idea how they treat us in prison. From the moment I set foot outside until the hour I return, I will have to provide them with a detailed written report of everything I saw, ate, and heard, who came to see me, whom I spoke to on the telephone. I will even have to put down every time I went to the toilet. Without their permission, how do you expect me to speak to my husband and my children who are abroad to make things worse? Inshallah, next time they allow me out, I will ask permission to speak them on the telephone." On the 22nd of May 1988, the prisoners were granted another 3-day visit home, and Fatemeh was also allowed out. This time, she had asked the brother permission, as she said, to speak on the telephone to her husband and children. They had agreed, but before calling, she had to inform intelligence headquarters. This time again, a large number of relatives had come from far and near to see her. On the second evening, She gave her husband's number to the telephone operator, but was told her turn would not come before midnight. She reported this information to intelligence headquarters, who gave her their permission. Unfortunately, it was 3 in the morning when the phone rang and a voice said, "Speak to your husband." But at this late hour, it was impossible to reach them. Another sorrow to add to the others. This cursed night, nobody fell asleep. Everyone lamented this poor woman's bad luck. Later, we learned that intelligence headquarters had given the operators instructions to put the call through only at this late hour of the night. Why? Only God and they know. Those who carried out and can continue to carry out these inhuman acts. Unfortunately, despite being allowed 2 visits home of 2 to 3 days each during 1988, Fatemeh was unable to speak to her children. I will end this reading with the last sentences of my grandfather's testimony. Fatemeh was everything to me, and to remain alive after her makes no sense. When I remember her character and her words, there is a whistling in my head. I feel as if the world around me has grown dark. Particularly when I see mothers holding young children by the hand or carrying them in their arms, while my Fatemeh spent 7.5 years in prison without ever having done anything wrong. She endured every imaginable kind of torture, both mental and physical, and all this while, the harshest punishment was to not being able to hold her children in her arms, even for an hour. Cursed be those visiting days when we watched her talk to her children, her eyes dry and bulging, her lips clamped together, her body trembling and too weak to hold the telephone receiver in her hand. This testimony from the father of a prisoner is unique, but it is by no way an isolated case. It has been more than 2 years that I am leading an empirical research on the ethnography of state violence after the revolution in Iran. And I came to know many more cases of women political prisoners being imprisoned with their babies or being deprived of their children, who could sometimes be alienated to them to the extent that they would refuse to call them mother after their releases. These painful experiences show how the relationship between prisoners and their families, and specifically their children, were a point of application of power and a method of repression. Children were not only casualties in a violence that targeted their parents. In a more cruel and systematic fashion, the organic relation between parents and children, the need for parents to protect their children and not be humiliated in front of them, the torture of seeing their children in distress because they needed their parents, missed them, fear for them, all the veins of motherhood were used for harassing, punishing, and breaking down the prisoners. The prison system in Iran was a system that tortured children at large scale. It deprived newborn babies from the milk of their mothers. It made infants watch their parents being tortured. It detained babies in hallways and corridors outside the wards where their mothers were detained, or in overcrowded wards. It executed pregnant women. Prison and mass execution do not only break or suppress the targeted individuals, but they also affect a circle of relatives. They impact on the lives of parents, of spouses, sisters, brothers, and the trajectory of the children. They create black holes of silence within families and tear people apart through guilt and too long contained anger. It is necessary to take into account this long-term effect of violence against the disappeared on the lives of the survivors. Indeed, prison has turned the most intimate aspect of the life of prisoners and their families into a battlefield. As Nasrin Sotoudeh understood when she said to her daughter, "I, better say we, have to stand firm." Thank you for your attention.
Merci.